Infernus Marines are deployed when Space Marines are facing the unending hordes of the enemies of the Imperium, whether that be orcs, tyranids, or traitor humans, it doesn't really matter. So long as they can burn, the Infernus Marines have a place. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we're covering the Infernus Marines, of course starring in the new, or used to be new, Leviathan box. They're a new unit for 10th edition. The Infernus Marines come in at 90 points for 5, or 180 for 10. They move 6 inches, they are toughness 4, a 3+ save, 2 wounds, leadership 6+, and OC 1. Fairly standard marine stats, nothing to write home about. In terms of ranged weapons, they all come standard with a bolt pistol, which is just 1 attack at 3, that hits on 3s at strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1. Just a bolt pistol, not much to say about it. The Pyre Blaster is Torrent and ignores cover, with D6 attacks that auto-hit at range 12, strength 5, AP 1, and damage 1, so this is excellent for cooking medium and light infantry, and just given how many of them you have, you're very likely to at least get a couple saves through on any target. In terms of melee weapons, it's just the close combat weapon, which is 3 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1. Useful enough if you're going to charge into something like guardsmen after you, say, cooked their allies, you could then charge in with this unit. In terms of abilities, they have Incendiary Terror. In your shooting phase, just after this unit has shot, you can select one enemy infantry unit hit by one or more of those attacks made with a Pyre Blaster. That enemy unit must take a Battle Shock test and subtract 1 from the result of that test. So Battle Shock rules are typically not the greatest, but when they do start to get at least a little bit interesting is when they have debuffs. This is very, very potent on things that have mediocre leadership already, like guardsmen or orcs, as you can force them to Battle Shock. As I mentioned Guard earlier, it is exceptional there because you can of course turn off any orders that might be affecting the unit, which could be useful to, say, get them out of take cover, or some other durability order they may have. In terms of unit composition, it's just 1 Infernus Sergeant and then 4 or 2/9 Infernus Marines. Nothing too interesting there, and they have no war gear options, just being everyone has the flamers and the bolt pistols, which is fine, as it means the unit is very focused on what it wants to do and doesn't have to split fire too much, because generally you just want to cook whatever's in front of you with immense fire. Moving on to buff options, the Captain gives you free Overwatch, which is excellent on these flamers, and the Captain has enough melee to actually make them pretty competent. The Apothecary gives you a decent return of points every time you stand one of these guys back up, but I'd say he's probably better suited to something like Hellblasters. The Ancient is actually, I'd say, pretty solid with the Stern Guard, not Stern Guard, the Infernus Marines, just for the fact that they like to stand on objectives and can force enemies off them pretty effectively, so having extra OC is nice. The Librarian gives you that 4+ invulnerable save, which is certainly handy, and some extra anti-elite firepower, and he unlocks the Librarius Conclave, where these guys are very good. The Chaplain and Justiciar are hardly even worth mentioning. As cool as it is to have a Chaplain charge in wreathed in fire, it's not really a good place for him, as their melee is quite mediocre, and Justiciar is pretty much the same. Lieutenant is one of the best budget buffers, because he's so cheap and he gives you lethal hits, but of course with Torrent weapons you never roll to hit, so you cannot lethal hit, so to say, which means that a Lieutenant really doesn't have much place here. Not that I think you would want to put him in here anyways. Vulcan is pretty interesting. If he is in your army, of course, he gives them OC2, which makes them really good on objectives, and he, of course, gets to pick a unit that is within 24 inches, and if any flamers or meltas, flamers relevant for these guys, target them, they of course get to reroll the full wound reroll. That was quite a hard thing to say, I'm not sure why. But that is, of course, very helpful to help these guys stack saves, and there's definitely some places where that can make these guys into a really, really savage unit in a particular detachment, which we'll be covering in just a moment. Out of these, though, I'd say probably the Captain and Librarian are probably my favorite, with the Ancient in second, and Vulcan, I wouldn't lead him, but it's nice to have him around. In terms of detachments, Gladius is always good, gives them extra mobility, which is great, and with Devastator Doctrine, you could hit them with AP2 Flamers, which is very nice, very good in mirror matches against other Space Marines, where the AP1 isn't bad, but could be better. Firestorm is obviously where these guys are exceptional. It brings them to Strength 6 Flamers, so they just melt anything at Toughness 3. And the options for Devastating Wounds is definitely expensive, but very nice, just because of how many attacks they have. Or +1 to wound is also pretty good, as you will be pretty general purpose just on account of how many wounds you will have to roll. You're going to get a good amount through, especially if you're wounding on 5s instead of 6s. Librarius Conclave is very good in Pyromancy. They get the extra strength, And they love the Fusillade enhancement that you would put on a librarian, because that gives them anti-monster and anti-vehicle 5+. And I believe that averages something like 12 to 15 wounds on a knight, which is kind of insane for flamethrowers, but that is what it is, I suppose. Very solid here. I'd say if you really want to make these guys excel, this place with Vulcan, definitely pretty interesting. And the rest that I didn't mention, there's nothing super specific. Some of them do have nice buffs, but they're not really specific for the Infernus Marines. Though I think they work well in most detachments, just as something to clean up enemy units that aren't worth bigger units shooting, but still need to be removed. These guys will generally do the job quite well, whether that be shooting something like Gretchen or a big unit of Imperial Guard. These guys will handle those units better than anyone else in the list, so of course it's nice to have a unit dedicated to that around. So, in terms of competition, Intercessors immediately come to mind, with their big buff meaning they get double attacks against one target, which means with 40 attacks, their amount of attacks are actually very similar, with average rolling, if you will. I'd say the Infernus Marines still, of course, do beat them out just because of their Strength 5, which means they're better against other Marines and things like that. But definitely both have very strong points and are both very good units, in my opinion. For example, just as a combo, if you wanted to run both of them, Intercessors tag an objective, and then you have your Infernus Marine sitting around to blow fire at anyone that comes too close to them, just to keep it yours. And of course, they will be battle shocked, so they couldn't take the objective, which would be very handy. And then I also wanted to mention the Stern Guard, which are similar to the Intercessors, though I'd say for the close range destruction role, the Infernus Marines probably do the job a little bit better, especially if you can get bonus AP on them, because while Devastating Wounds is very nice and rerolling Wounds is very nice, I just generally prefer Infernus Marines, though I still do really like Stern Guard veterans, just for different reasons. And of course, the higher strength helps just immensely against most targets. Especially, again, as I mentioned with the Intercessor section, these guys will do much better against normal Marines. Terminators, Orc Boys is a huge one, because Orcs are toughness 5. Bolters tend to be very ineffective against them, but Pyroblasters do not suffer from that, and with their AP 1, they will melt Orcs very, very fast, which is very handy, because Orcs can be surprisingly difficult to remove at times. So, the Infernus Marines, like most Marine units, are pretty simple. Their Flamers are exceptional against all but the toughest of infantry. Like, they won't, melt Custodes, but they do absolutely make just mincemeat out of units like Guardsmen or Eldar. And with their weight of fire, especially in bigger units, you can usually chip in a few wounds against even tough targets. Personally, I sort of like to use them in an almost rear guard kind of role, where they will be just behind the front lines, where, your Terminators or your Assault Intercessors would be. And these guys are around to catch any unit trying to flank, trying to deep strike, trying to get to your home field. These guys can stand around and just burn anything that gets too close to you. They make excellent defensive units, mainly because their Overwatch is so good, and most units that can slip past your main line will be usually not tough enough to withstand a big unit of these guys firing the Flamers at them. But if you do want to use them as a mainline damage dealer, of course Vulcan is the first one you want to go with. But I'd still say Librarians and Librarius Conclave really crank these guys to 11. And even in something like Gladius, just getting extra AP is very good. Firestorm Assault Force, extra strength and assault is very good to allow them to advance and shoot. Infernus Marines in general, though, are pretty fitting for their role in 10th edition. They are the starter Marine unit. They're as simple as they can be. They cook infantry very well. And even though they are very simple, I don't think that's a bad thing. Their damage is excellent. They make a solid enough Battle Shock rule, about as good as Battle Shock's going to get. They make pretty great grunts, in my opinion. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.